Coming to you from deep within the swamps of the southeastern United States, this is a paranormal podcast unlike one you've ever experienced before. This is the Westgate Paranormal Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Westgate Paranormal Podcast. Today is Tuesday, July 31st, 2018. Today, we're going to be a little bit more open with our podcast, kind of just not really focus on any one subject, but kind of just address some questions we've gotten from other people, talk about whatever's on our mind, and address some of the issues within the paranormal community, paranormal investigations in particular, that sort of thing. So without further ado, let's get started.
Okay.
So one of your friends was asking you.
Yeah, they were talking about, do we have an opinion on cameras or anything like that? What's better to film with or take photos with, in your opinion?
So just still photography cameras within investigations.
Yeah.
So honestly, in my opinion, in my experience, you can basically take pictures with anything you have at your disposal. The other day, we were doing a tour. I was doing a tour out in one of the cemeteries at night, and this couple came along to do the tour, and they actually went out and bought disposable cameras.
Nice.
So they had their cell phones with them to take take pictures with their cell phones. But they said that they wanted to also be able to just easily get hard copies of just old-fashioned photos.
And that's the thing, like the person who actually asked, she brought me a picture to my work, and she took it with an old, film camera.
Just like a regular old point and shoot.
Yeah. And so, and she had absolutely caught a moving orb in it. There's no mistake about it at all. So, I mean, you don't need technology, like high technology, new technology for, investigating at all.
No, you really don't. I mean, you see a lot of older photographs, and even when I was younger, photographs using Polaroids, like Instamatic cameras. If you are going to get a more modern camera and you want to use it, point and shoots are perfect. Honestly, they're easily available now. For the most part, all of them are over 5 megapixels, which are really good. Most cell phone cameras that you have with the front facing, like the selfie camera, usually range anywhere from about 4 to 8 megapixels. So even with those older battery operated point and shoots that you put, an SD card or a memory card in of some sort, I use those for years. They're convenient, they're easy, you just put them in your pocket, and of course too, using your cell phone.
Yeah. I've got some good ones with just my cell phone.
Yeah, you really can. I mean, the only thing that it seems to really help the only thing that seems to really help, especially if you're doing it in dark areas or at night, you want to make sure that you can have a flash. That seems to be the biggest help with all of it. As an example, like when you're using your cell phone camera, the flash will illuminate to basically bounce off whatever's in the room to judge the distance so that it can focus if it's in a dark area. And as that light comes on, you'll see things on your screen. You'll see things in front of you that you're not seeing with your naked eye. And I always tell people on the tours and stuff, just make sure you turn your flash on because we're in low light conditions. But once again, it's like, and it goes back to that with, when to investigate. You don't even have to do it at night. So you can.
And that was the other part of her question.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, like what we were talking about, I think we even mentioned it on one of the other podcasts, like a lot of paranormal investigators investigate at night because they have day jobs, so it's just easier to investigate at night. But also, a lot of paranormal investigators in groups do it at night, besides just that fact, because a lot of times they're using infrared cameras and things, and they actually work better in darker light. And some cameras will actually not even really put off that infrared illuminator. Like,
right.
in one of the places that I go to, every corner of every room has security cameras in it, and they're night vision security cameras. So when you go in there, when you turn the lights on, you'll hear a click from one of the cameras that's pointing towards the lamp that I turn on in the room, because it's basically turning off that illuminator.
Gotcha.
So it's just doing, regular video at that point. So, I mean, yeah, a lot of people that I know have used just regular cameras, used Polaroid cameras, used old film cameras. That's what we used to do when we would, before a lot of these newer cameras are out. I want to say it was a Mavica, and it actually used floppy disks. So you could only fit 3 or 4 pictures on a single floppy disk.
That's
before you
crazy.
had to change it. So we would carry a bag of floppies around. And then they started making those cameras where you could put mini DVDs, mini CDs in it. And then finally we came out, we've got the memory sticks now. So, and you can basically have on a memory stick, the size of what would have been a very expensive hard drive, 15 years ago, is something that's the size of your thumbnail now, like what's in your phone.
Yeah.
So you can get almost unlimited photos and videos and all sorts of stuff. So it doesn't take a lot. Whatever, yeah, we were watching on Prime with the Michigan Ghost Hunter Society with Brian Harnois used to be part of TAPS with Ghost Hunters. And he actually made a really good point about equipment in general. He's like, if you've got $10,000 to spend in equipment, he's like, instead of doing that, take that $10,000 and take your team or yourself or whatever and travel and go investigate, because you really don't need much more than something to take photos with and something to detect EMF with, and even that really is not an absolute necessity. So basically a voice recorder, which you can use on your cell phone, or a pocket recorder of some sort.
Your camera, which is on your cell phone.
Your camera on your cell phone, or, a point and shoot pocket camera. And you can pretty much do a whole investigation just with that, and then save the money for the expensive equipment after you've used the money you have to go travel around and do investigations and get experience, get evidence, build your team up, stuff like that.
And actually, we can kind of prove that when we do an investigation at the house that my parents are getting ready to sell. I say we just go over there and just use, like, our phones, and that's it. And, like, maybe a separate recorder and, what you use for your stuff at work. But other than that way we can prove you don't need a ton.
Yeah, you really don't.
To do an investigation.
And minimalism actually kind of, I think, helps, too, because you have less setup time, less things you have to worry about moving around from spot to spot in a lot of, instances. You can do a whole investigation, which is something you can carry in a bag with you. And you can always have it ready that way, too.
Yeah.
Like, we've got, different sound recorders. I've got several different cameras and stuff like that. But it makes it convenient if you want to have it in different rooms. But I don't even use night vision cameras anymore, and they're not really, like with the Sony Handycams, they used to, be really mass produced. You could buy them at Walmart, high 8, using an actual cassette to record it on. And now it's, they don't really even make those easily available. It's all old stock at this point, unless you're wanting to spend more money or getting smaller resolution cameras and stuff like that. And they're very much available. I mean, but you can do it just as easily without having to go through all that trouble and still get the evidence. Just light up the room a little bit. you don't have to investigate in the darkness.
No, you don't.
You can get just as much evidence in the daytime as you can in the nighttime.
I feel like people who have lived in homes that have activity understand that what was just said perfectly, because you can be sitting here in this house in the middle of the day and you start hearing stuff or seeing stuff out of the corner of your eye. Like, it's all the time. Nothing has to be done at night. If you're scared and you want to investigate but you don't want to do it in the dark, have some fun and try it during the day when no one's home. You don't have to do it at night. If you want to be an investigator, you don't have to be worried about going in the dark if you don't want to.
Exactly. And a lot of people do that, especially if they're doing like EVP research and stuff in the cemeteries, because in a lot of places, in a lot of states, Florida being one of them, it's illegal to go into a closed cemetery after sunset.
Right.
So people will go in the daytime and just do nothing more than take, a little digital recorder with them, or even use their cell phone. Some of the people that go on investigations with me, they only use their cell phone and a voice recorder program, and I've heard excellent EVPs that they've recorded, over the years from that. They're always willing to share, hey, listen to this EVP I got last year or something.
Right.
Last night was a perfect example. One of the guys on my tour, he had gone to the same place a year ago and came back and went there with me last night. And as we were in the van driving back into town, his wife was playing the EVP they got in that same location last year.
Wow.
Using his cell phone. So that's another thing, with EVPs. It's sort of like with cameras. If it's capable of recording audio, it's capable of recording EVP. I know I've said that probably a million times to people. Up until digital cassette recorders, digital recorders, not digital cassette recorders, up until digital recorders kind of became the norm, I just used one of those mini cassette recorders for a long time. And yeah, there's a higher noise floor there, and it's a little bit harder if you want to take those recordings and put them on your computer, because you gotta use a patch cable and you gotta kind of monitor your input levels so you're not overdriving it and clipping the sound and stuff. But if you're not even wanting to do that at all, it's not even a big deal. Just make sure not to reuse the same cassette over and over, because you'll get artifacts from the magnetization and demagnetization on it.
So basically you'll be creating EVPs is kind of what you'd be doing.
Yeah, you're getting artifacts of noise, because it is a magnetic tape. So when you use a tape and record over it and over and over again, eventually you're going to have pieces that don't completely disappear between the recordings, and you'll start hearing things that shouldn't be there, and it's really just old recordings bleeding through,
right,
because it's not completely demagnetized.
Right.
I've got a few micro cassettes from back in the day, and I've put them on my computer since then, but I still have the originals, and those EVPs are still there. So that's something that, as long as you take care of them, that's how they used to do it, reel-to-reels and cassettes.
Yep.
So my first EVP was on a reel-to-reel, and I didn't even know that's what it was.
So I guess the other subject or topic that another person brought up was talking about, I guess perfect example was, as she stated, Zach Bagans, with him going into places over and over again with a high, I guess, darker energy. I'm not going to say what he normally says, but a darker energy. Do you feel like the more often that you go into places, the more it affects you over time, and like how you, I guess, kind of portray yourself, or, everything.
I think in some cases, Zach is a good example, yeah, because he tends now more than he used to, and he even makes comments about that. He's like, I try to get away from this, and it just keeps sucking me in more and more, that I try not to go into these, dark, malevolent places, but that seems to be all I do now. That's basically what he was saying. And I think that's kind of, psychologically speaking, yeah. Would you agree? It's like, It's
like subconsciously somehow it affects you and draws you towards other places that are of similar character, I guess.
Yeah. Like the quote, you stare long enough into the abyss and eventually the abyss will stare back into you.
Right.
With Nietzsche.
Right.
It's sort of that thing. It's like you start resonating with a certain wavelength of spirits that are coming in contact with you, and you can either consciously choose to say this is not what I'm interested in, or you can consciously choose to say, okay, I'll keep delving further in this, but then subconsciously it may start happening and you're not realizing it's happening until you're in the middle of it. So it's something you kind of have to look at.
That's what I was gonna say, because a lot of people, go places. I mean, just think about you as a person, like how many different places you go into every day, and I feel like those types of places can affect you just on their own, not being haunted or anything. Like, okay, say I have to go to Walmart.
I was just thinking Walmart. Yeah.
Right. So I go to Walmart, and knowing that I have to go to that awful place already makes me mad. And then I get there, and everybody shopping there is angry because nobody wants to be there either.
Yep.
And then you drive home and somebody cuts you off. That's going to make you even more mad. And so you basically go through your whole entire day. But it started kind of with you already knowing that you have to go to this place. So...
Right, you're already kind of prepping yourself for that state of mind, like
So I definitely agree and feel that the more you go into places that are bad, obviously
you're psyching yourself up for that moment.
Right, you're like, oh God, I've already been here once. Like, say you go into like a repeat house or a repeat place that's haunted with bad entities or whatever. The first time you go, something bad happens, and then you go back again to investigate. You've already psyched yourself up to know that something bad might be in there. And I think that it doesn't even have to be something like that. I think that it can just be knowing the history of a building.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And you're already going into that going, shit, this happened here.
Yep.
What if something happens now? And I think that you're already kind of opening up that door for someone to be like, oh, well, it already knows about me, so... here come.
Right. It's like you put yourself in that frame of mind, and when you put yourself in a certain frame of mind, you are basically sort of putting, not to sound cliche, but literally you are. You're resonating with those energies based upon how you think, and especially on a level of spirit, that's kind of like showing fear to a bear in the woods.
Right.
It's like, oh, you already have
that's
this
what
sort
they
of
feed off of.
Yeah, you're emanating that from yourself, and so therefore you're attracting that right away, and it's just going to feed back and forth in a loop like that.
I think that's why it's really important that, like, whether you're spiritual or you're not spiritual, like, before going into any place, like, clear your thoughts, clear your minds. Don't have any emotional attachment to what is about to happen, because it could be nothing. But going into it with high anxiety is going to feed into anything negative that could be there.
Exactly. I have worked with a few people that are prime examples of that. Like, things will be fine and stuff in a location that we go to every night, as an example. I'm not going to say specific people or places, but it's played out really well recently, I've noticed.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this place has been all right, but then something happens. And then you hear about it the next day when you see them at work. Oh my God, last night, this happened here. And then it's instantly like, I wonder what's going on. And then every day it gets a little bit worse for them until finally they say, I don't even want to go in there anymore. Or they don't even finish their tour, or they just don't even walk in.
Right. And then in the same moment, you can be behind them and nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
So I feel like it is a big thing for me to make sure that when I go into something, I take a few deep breaths and I just try to relax, and then I just go in.
Right. A lot of people focus on the fact of after being in contact with something, or leaving a location. They want to like sage themselves or cleanse themselves or something. Honestly, I think it's more important to kind of have that mindset before you even go into it.
Absolutely.
And don't have expectations. Okay, you may be told, okay, this place has, demonic activity and, this happens to this person and this person. And if you're sensitive, then yeah, you're going to feel that more.
Yes.
But you can also prepare yourself for it better.
Yes.
And you can not feed into it and not even react. Be like, I'm just not even interested in communicating with you. Literally, just like, leave me alone.
Yep.
And if it happens, just be like, all right, because that's the same thing. Another example, being with other people who've been in those situations. I've been in lots of places where I've been touched or I felt very uncomfortable, and I just acknowledge that. I'm like, wow, this feels really not so nice tonight.
Right.
Or, oh, something just grabbed me or whatever.
Right.
And then I've been with people that do investigations too, and something touches them and they're ready to jump out a window.
Right.
And that's no reference to
No.
Zach again. That's literally people I've known. And I'm with a group, and this is somebody who also, does tours and stuff, and they're like freaking out. Oh my God, somebody, don't touch me. Leave me alone. I can't be in here anymore. I'm like, you got touched,
Right.
Why
and
is
that's
that a
the
big
thing,
deal?
like sometimes like when we're talking on like the touching or the pulling, it's not a negative thing. Like just because you get, your hair pulled or your shirt pulled or your hand touched or, anything like that, that doesn't mean that it's negative. So it shouldn't automatically be, you shouldn't always go into freak out mode is kind of what I'm trying to say.
A lot of people have that really uncomfortable idea of something they can't see coming into their personal space, and therefore it's automatically an attack, or just because they don't like it. But there's no reason to freak out about it. I
think that's my big thing, because people automatically go into something thinking it's going to be Paranormal Activity, the movie. And I do not believe that anything ever gets to that point, but that's me.
Yeah.
I'm once again from like last episode, if I ever saw it firsthand, I would absolutely believe. Right. But I've never witnessed anything that's ever been violent or malevolent or any, like, I feel it. You can feel when you walk into somewhere that's negative.
Right.
But I've never physically had anything to where I felt like, oh my God, I've got to get the hell out of here.
Yeah. Well, I have.
I know you have. But...
I have actually left an investigation with equipment set up and let it continue, the cameras rolling, so to speak. But still nothing personally happened to me. I witnessed in that place things that I could not explain and have not seen in other places, but it's very rare to be put in a situation, well, for me anyway, but I'm kind of stone-faced with most stuff.
Yeah.
Even though I heavily believe in it, and I heavily am very communicative, I guess you could say, with the spirit world in that way. I'm very sensitive like that, but I don't think that I see everything as an attack or a reason to freak out.
Mm-mm.
And sometimes, like one time, about 18 years ago, and I've told you this story, we were at the St. Francis Inn in St. Augustine with the group that I used to investigate with. And one of the guys in the group was standing there in the courtyard of the St. Francis Inn, which is a very haunted bed and breakfast now. Is built in 1791, and it's on the south end of St. Augustine in the ancient city area. And we're standing around, and this guy kind of always had this attitude that, spirits aren't really going to do anything to you. Even if you get scared, it's just because you don't understand it. If things seem negative, it's just because you don't understand it. They're really not capable at all of doing any physical harm to a person, and they don't want to. And honestly, I believe that's BS. There is a possibility for them to do physical harm to people. I've seen scratches and stuff. We know about things like that. Yeah, you've been scratched yourself.
I just got scratched last week.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even something you freaked out about. Like,
no.
You didn't feel like it was even an attack, but some people do. And so he's sitting there talking about this, and about 15 feet away is one of those iron shepherd's hooks that you put out in your yard to hang potted plants from, and it's leaning at a 45-degree angle up in the corner about 15 feet away from us. And as he's saying this thing literally projects itself across the courtyard in a beeline right at him and lands at his feet. And everybody just stopped for a second, like, what the hell just happened? And then we're like, so do you still believe nothing can hurt you? And he just laughed, and he's like, well, it didn't hit me. It could have if it wanted to. So.
See, and this is where, like, I do not believe that story. Like,
right, I understand.
But it's just...
You didn't witness it.
Exactly. Like, when someone tells me something like that, I'm just like, I mean, it probably fell over in his direction. And I know that it happened, and I know that you believe, and I
no,
get
it.
it.
Happened. 15 feet away.
I totally get it. But when I hear that, my brain just does not comprehend.
Yeah.
At all.
Well, it's an extreme instance, and things usually are not that extreme. It takes a whole lot of focused energy for a spirit to really even move something at all. But like the apartment recently above the British pub, that happened with another tour guide with the box fan flying across the room, and with me with the stuffed animal being thrown across the bed, and everybody, and like one person was like, "Oh no, I'm out of here," and everybody else was like, "Did you just see that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's like 2 feet in front of me." And of course I saw it. And then I just continued talking about what I was talking about.
And the thing is that it's all on film, because all of that is recorded
right.
at all times too. Which, once again, I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
But I still don't believe unless it is literally in front of me, unless it is happening right then at that moment. I don't believe it, even if it's caught on camera.
Yeah, you are a super skeptic.
Yeah,
and
it's funny because until we started this podcast, I didn't realize actually how big of a skeptic I actually am.
You have witnessed and experienced yourself many paranormal, unexplained things, but you are still a huge skeptic, and even you. I mean, and it's not bad because, as an investigator, regardless of what your personal belief is, you really should, especially if it's somebody else's house or location or something like that, you damn sure better be skeptical, because there are a lot of people who, are either psychologically unstable or they're complete con artists, or they're just delusional about something or misunderstanding what's going on, which is why we go in and, as an investigation and make sure that there's no like EMF fields that could be affecting them. There's nothing going on that can be explained.
It's kind of like, it kind of goes into possession. It's kind of why, the Catholic Church wants a psychological evaluation done, because it could be schizophrenia. It could be this. It could be that. And the same goes for like, if you're part of an investigative team or wanting to be, you have to know ahead of time what you're walking into, kind of what you just said, because there are so many crazy people out there.
Yes. And that's a really good point. If you're going out ghost hunting, if you're just getting started and doing investigations,
please do them in like public buildings,
and don't go alone.
No, never go alone. Do them in public buildings when you're starting off. Have a good team behind you.
Have you never seen Silence of the Lambs?
Yeah, have you never seen Silence of the Lambs?
I mean, it's a super important point just for safety, because there are a lot of crazy people, and crazy people seek out other people who are either crazy themselves or naive enough to fall into their own craziness.
Goes into mass hysteria, which is always my favorite subject.
Exactly. One of the things that's I was talking with somebody about this online, and was it Michael Keaton? It may have been, but I couldn't tell because he was wearing this bat face thing, and I don't know. But I was talking to someone in a group the other day, and they were talking about all the intake forms that they give to clients when they're doing an investigation, and I was like, well, yeah, it should absolutely be necessary. You need to know, first off, what kind of life experiences they've had in a paranormal sense, as well as their mental psychological stability. Some people even go so far as taking a pill ID book with them, and when they go looking through the house before they do an investigation,
brilliant.
Yeah, because if you go in and you're like, oh, they've got like all these pills in their medicine cabinet, let me see what this is. Oh, it's an antipsychotic. Well, obviously there could be something more to it than just something paranormal. It could be a mental health issue.
Or, I mean, sometimes vice versa. People could be on antipsychotics because there actually is activity. So it's kind of...
That's a very good point.
You know...
That is a very good point.
They could have lived in the house for their whole entire life, and there could be something in that home...
that has affected them to
right,
that extent.
And everybody just tells them that they're crazy along with their doctors, and then they're on these antipsychotics, but shit's still happening,
right.
You know?
Perfect example of that is a picture that I think I have it on our Facebook page. If not, I can put it on there. I know I have it on my personal Facebook page. A number of years ago, I was downtown in Jacksonville, wandering the streets, just taking pictures of the architecture. And this homeless guy who was obviously a homeless veteran who was walking across or on the other side of the street while I was wandering around, and he was talking to himself. And he sees me across the street with my camera, and he yells over at me. He's like, "Hey, I got a picture for you." And he leans up against the parking meter with his elbow, and he flips me off. And I laugh, and he laughs, and I take a picture. I'm like, all right, man, cool, you know?
I would have bought that picture.
And then going back after I got my film developed, because this was a regular film camera at the time, I didn't even have a digital camera at that point in my life. This how many years ago it was. I went and got the film developed, and when I was going through and looking, I was like, oh, look, there's that guy that was, walking down the street talking to himself. Because schizophrenia, mental illness, is a very big problem in this country, especially with the homeless and people that are veterans and are homeless and PTSD and all sorts of things. And you don't really think too much of it in the aspect that they're talking to themselves.
Right.
And I'm not degrading it. I'm not saying these are crazy homeless people doing that. I'm saying that is a genuine mental health issue that we need to face. But looking at that picture, standing next to him and kind of behind him, that is not a shadow, was an apparitional outline of another person.
And that gives me chills, you saying that.
Yeah, and when you look at the outline of this apparition that's standing with him, there's something projecting over this guy's shoulder, the apparition's shoulder, and it looks like he's got a rifle that he's slung on his shoulder, which would be another, veteran basically, or somebody that was a soldier. And then it clicked. I'm like, well, we look at these people and are like, okay, well, they're schizophrenic or something. They're talking to themselves. Maybe they're not. And that was my first thought. I'm like, oh my God, this guy was probably actually talking to someone, and people just think he's a crazy homeless guy.
Right.
And so it was just, it's something you think about, and,
And once again, this was broad daylight that you took this picture.
Right.
So
this was early afternoon, broad daylight.
See, you can get stuff no matter what time of day.
Yep, exactly. There's a picture that's similar to that. This was actually in the evening, but an apartment I used to live in years ago. And there was, to my research, I could find no reason. Nothing really happened in that apartment other than it was an older apartment building. It wasn't the best neighborhood. And so, over the years, a lot of people obviously had done things there that they shouldn't have and got arrested just because of the neighborhood it was in.
Right.
But every once in a while, something would knock at my front door. And I lived upstairs at the top of the stairs. Somebody would knock at the door, and I'd go to the door, and nobody would be there. And the first few times it happened, I thought, okay, well, it's probably just the building, like, shifting a little, and it sounds like something's knocking. And one night, it did it several times in one night, and it was very obvious. Somebody was boom, 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 knocking on the door, and no one was there. So I took my old Canon... I had an old Minolta that I had, and it was a film camera, and I set it up on a tripod down at the bottom of the stairs, and you could go out on my balcony and look down and see the bottom of the stairs.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did, so that I know that nobody was going to run off with my camera. And I had a motion sensor that I had rigged up that was actually originally made to trigger the shutter when a bright light happened. So it was supposed to be for lightning photography. And so I basically just took it so it would be a regular motion sensor and not just a lightning sensor.
Right.
And I had it pointing up the stairs to the door leading into the apartment. And I tried this for several nights until finally there was the knock and it caught a picture. And it is a full-on apparition of somebody standing at my door.
That's crazy.
So, and it was a black and white photo. It wasn't, and I developed it myself, because I had a dark room at the time. So I developed it myself on the enlarger, and sure enough, there it was. It was a person standing at the door. So, and that wasn't, in the middle of the night. No, other than a motion sensor attached, there wasn't really any special equipment. It was just an old entry-level sort of Minolta film camera. So, yeah. And that's, that happens here in our house. We hear stuff banging. Sounds like
all the time.
Opening and closing the cabinet doors, walking down the hallways.
I'm honestly surprised we haven't had it happen yet.
Yeah. Well, it had happened earlier, but yeah, since we're doing this, it's like it happens throughout the day, every single day. So what was the next thing we were talking about? Okay, so the idea of going into a place and being affected by that sort of energy.
We kind of got off track on that
one. Your persona kind of attracting that, or you becoming more attracted to that sort of energy. If you don't have your mind, I guess, in the right place when you go into something, then you can be easily influenced one way or the other. And I'm not saying it's like a mental defect that people are easily affected. I'm just saying it can happen to anyone. And it can lead into like a mass hysteria sort of thing. When I'm doing my tour groups, it's something that happens almost nightly. People will take pictures, they'll come running up to me and they'll be like, look at this. This happened the other night. Somebody had taken a picture and, they had taken a video on their phone and they thought that they had some sort of orb, because it was really bright and it was sort of moving, within the frame. And so she had me look at it. And I'm like, well, first you got to look at, what were you aiming at? And sure enough, that's all it was there was a street light and it was just lens flare. And she's like, well, how do you know that? I'm like, well, look at where the street light is. Look at where the dot is that you're seeing. And it always moves in relation to that street light. It's lens flare is all it is. Or walking into a place and somebody feels like something's touching them. And they freak out about it, and then next thing you know, somebody's like, well, it's because you got an ant crawling on your shirt and keeps touching your neck, There's no reason to instantly freak out. You need to figure out what's causing it first, and if it's not hurting you, don't freak out about it at all. The same thing with spider webs.
Yeah. Well, but the thing is that supposedly when you walk through something and there's no spider webs, but you feel spider webs.
Exactly. Yep.
So...
And that's what I'm referring to, though, is that you get that.
I'm sorry, it doesn't matter if I walk into a fucking spider web, whether it's there or not, I'm losing my shit. I don't care.
But it's a common thing in an area with paranormal occurrences happening. And you walk through, you could even be walking out in the middle of a room, but it happens a lot in places. You'll walk through a door and you're like, oh, I feel like I just walked through spider webs and they're all over my face or my arm or something. People instantly, your response is to kind of freak out about, oh, I just walked into a spider web. There may be a spider on me. But then you realize there's no spider web at all because it's that electrostatic charge that you're walking through. And that's what sets off like REM pods and will affect anything that can detect static charges like that. And some of it, even with EMF, will cause a static charge, like TVs. It's the same sort of thing. You put your hand near an old tube TV or something and your hair stands up.
All I'm saying is if you are an adult and you walk into a spider web, it is okay to freak out.
Yeah,
that is the one time during an investigation. If you walk into one, I say that it is perfectly acceptable to lose your shit.
It's okay to freak out.
Yeah.
I don't know how
on that one.
Yeah.
That one instance.
You don't want to go running out a window.
I mean, I might.
A lot of people do. If they can freak out just by something touching them or tapping on them.
Right.
And then you feel like, oh my God, I just walked through this 8-foot spider web all around me. Because it is.
See, now I'm going to have nightmares.
Especially here in Florida. Well, in the South in general, any sort of like swampy sort of environment. Oh my God, the spiders that we have out here.
Oh, I just think about what you told me about the people in the graveyard last night.
Excuse me. Yeah, last night I had a group. We were going through one of the abandoned graveyards. And there was a large spider web between two trees, and it caught a glimmer of my flashlight, so I instantly go over and see, oh look, a spider, because I like spiders. I don't necessarily want them on my face, but I also want to know where they're at, and I have had them on my face quite a few times mowing, like when I worked for the state in the parks and stuff.
Right.
But the spiders we have down here, the orb weaver spiders. Some of them are almost as big as your hand, and they can make webs going, 30, 40 feet across between two trees. So it's common here is what I'm saying. So anyway, this was not one of those giant spiders. This was a spider about the size of a 50-cent piece, and it was in a very large web between two trees. And when I saw the glimmer, I went over and shined my light on it, and they saw me looking, and they were like, oh my God, that spider, it's huge. And I'm like, no, it's not. And they're like, we don't have spiders like that in Pennsylvania, just out in the middle of everything. And I'm like, well, you walk through the forest and you'll see them every 15 feet here in Florida, and you'll eventually walk through them.
Florida is the Australia of the United States.
Yeah.
We are.
Florida and the swamps of Louisiana kind of, it plays into every fear you can imagine, with alligators and snakes and spiders and mosquitoes the size of small birds.
Yes.
That's
you can
our state
see
bird.
them coming at you.
Yeah.
Like, they don't sneak up on you. You know when a swarm is coming towards you, or even one.
Yeah, without a doubt. They can lift small children and carry them away like pterodactyls. But that's the joys of living in a swampy subtropical climate. You've got this huge variety within the ecosystem. And even the armadillos, I mean.
Oh yeah, they were freaked out by an armadillo too.
An armadillo came, it rustled the bushes, so that could be anything. And in the middle of the night, in the woods, in a cemetery, that's a valid sort of...
dare that armadillo be in there?
That's a valid sort of, okay, stop for a second, what is rustling that bush? Because it could be something that could kill you. So you stop.
Florida.
Yeah. And here comes an armadillo, and it walks right up to my feet. And these people are freaking out. They're like, oh my God, what is that? I'm like, it's an armadillo. I'm like, it is nothing to be afraid of. And then it just wanders around. It just is looking at us like, all right, you're not bothering me. I'm not bothering you. But they're everywhere down here. So,
do these people not watch TV?
I don't know. But I mean, it's kind of a common thing, especially in today's society. I think more than anything, a lot of people with ghost hunting shows, they see what's going on in the shows, and a lot of things that happen can be overly dramatic sometimes, how they react.
Yes. Because
it's TV. And even if, you're seeing a show that's an hour long, they probably stay there filming it for 3 days to get, the content for that hour. And and it's a lot of it with some of the shows. I'm not saying they're all like that. They're not freaking out, but they do become a little bit more dramatic than is necessary sometimes because it's a ratings game. And these are even with, well-respected investigators. Everybody freaks out sometimes. I mean, I've jumped back a couple times, in my life.
Yeah.
Even places I go every night, something will happen. Like with the growl last week, I was talking and I was like, did I just hear that over my shoulder? And everybody's like, that was a loud, frickin' aggressive growl. And I'm like, okay, so we know something's growling at us now.
Right.
But it's a valid reason to freak out a little bit.
I've been uncomfortable, but I think it was because you made me uncomfortable at the Moon River investigation when I was walking down the stairs.
Well, because you're going to walk through this thing.
Well, I had an apparition, in front of me and behind me, or it was two in front of me. Or
you had, down at the bottom of the stairs when we were upstairs at Moon River in Savannah, we were using the FLIR, and you were in front of me. I was behind you with the FLIR.
That's right.
Down at the very bottom of the stairs, I was like, hold on, slow down a second. And you're like, what? And I'm like, just slow down. I'm like, stop. Don't walk.
See, you have to tell me to stop.
Yeah, because you kept walking. And you have to understand, we're like sort of at the top of the stairs, kind of this top third of the stairs when I start seeing something. And on the FLIR screen, you know, obviously it's a heat signature. So I'm like, I'm not really sure what I'm seeing at first. I'm like, slow down. Don't walk all the way down there yet. Basically just not to contaminate what I may be seeing with our own heat signatures. Right. And then it just basically became more and more formed, and it was a full-on apparition of a person standing down there and basically like waving their hands like, stop, don't come down the stairs. And that's when I was finally like, stop, there's something down there.
Yep.
So I try not to freak
that
people out.
Was the only time, and it was because you yelled at me to stop when you could have just asked politely.
Well, that's why I said slow down. I want to see what this is.
Slow down and stop are two different things, sir.
That's true. It is.
I take you literally.
So you are now witnessing our usual daily conversations. Our podcast is us sitting here talking like we always talk. But this is how it is.
And it's much nicer doing it this way because when I do my little research, I'm flipping through papers and trying to figure out what we're going to talk about next. So this time I actually haven't had to do that, and I get to just relax.
Yeah, we loaned our teleprompter out, so it's all paper notes.
Yes. I like to do it old school.
Yeah. And but there's just been so many, different questions, different things, and without like dedicating a whole episode to every piece of minute detail or question, we figure we'd kind of just have a casual conversation, lump it all together, and just sort of cover some of the more often asked questions and stuff.
And we'll go back to our strict routine next podcast, but we didn't have a dedicated subject this week, and neither of us could agree on a dedicated subject, so
and it's been a really I'm sitting here very tired even doing this, so to be completely honest, I've got one day off this whole these 2 weeks of work, so I kind of would just rather sit here and chat about it and talk about stuff that, people have asked us and experiences that we've had and everything.
Yeah.
And we still want to hear experiences that you've had, that we can answer, that we can research, because that's what we love hearing, people ask us different things, and I'm not saying I'm an expert on it, but it also gives us a lot of times somebody will say something or ask us a question, and it kind of makes you stop and be like, oh, well, I never really looked at it that way. And so it opens up a new sort of horizon or viewpoint because you have to research it from a different angle or something.
Yep.
So, what?
But this is also the downfall of not having a script because...
it can turn into babble. And I can babble.
And I can't.
I'm a quiet person normally. If I don't have something to say, I really just don't say anything. But when it comes to something like this, I mean, I can just pick out experiences, or I can go on and on. And even when I'm doing my tours, I'm like, if I start to bore you, y'all just tell me to shut up, because I will. I'll sit there and go over every little detail of history on where we're at and things like that, because that's what excites me about a lot of it, because I think that when you're going into a place or doing an investigation, the research part of it and finding the separating line, or the line of demarcation, so to speak, between the urban legends associated with a place or the tales that have been passed down about a place, and then comparing that with the actual history of why it's happening.
Right.
That's what really interests me a lot, a whole lot. I mean, there are a lot of stories that you hear on ghost tours, and then when you go back and you research it, those stories sometimes are entirely made up, completely and totally made up.
And a lot of times the stories are actually really boring once you take away the urban legend side of it. Like, there was one you were telling me about the other day, and it wasn't true, and then the real story was something really fucking boring. Like, wasn't even entertaining in the least. I'm like, you should probably keep with the urban legend because the other one is just not a seller.
And see, I find it interesting.
I mean, I find it interesting, but it just lacks the romanticized.
Yeah, it's true. But I so this is the story. And let me folks spin a tale for you of the Castillo de San Marcos. There is a story associated with a room in the Castillo de San Marcos, which is the Spanish military fort, so to speak, that looks like a fortress in St. Augustine, Florida. And it was built by the Spanish when they were occupying St. Augustine between the years of 1672 and about the end of 1694, 95. But a lot of the ghost tours will tell a story about this room that we call the powder room because it was originally built by the Spanish to keep gunpowder supplies in. And they never used it for that because they realized that the leaching of water created too much moisture in that room for them to reliably store their gunpowder. So they used it as a trash room. And when I say a trash room, I mean that when they slaughtered cattle and when they slaughtered chickens and things like that, they would take the waste and throw it into this room. And in 1763, the Spanish ceded control of St. Augustine to the British in exchange for the Spanish being able to keep Cuba. So when they did that, they basically just sealed up this room, just bricked it over, sealed it up. The British were there for 20 years, and then the Spanish came back and took over again. So the story goes that there was a colonel who was stationed at that fort at the time, who was in control of the fort, and he was married to a woman named Dolores. And there was a captain that was sent to be stationed at the fort and work there. And the story goes that Dolores and this captain were kind of making eyes with each other, and then the colonel realized that they sort of had a spark between them, and that led into a full-on affair, basically. And so the colonel arranged a small group of private soldiers that he had under his command to basically catch them in the act and arrest his wife Dolores and this captain. And he took them, or had them taken into the powder room, shackled to the walls, standing up facing each other, and then brick over the entrance. And their bodies were not found till 40 years later in the 1820s, when they accidentally basically broke open a portion of the floor above it when they were moving a cannon around. And then they opened up this room, and they found these two skeletons shackled to the wall facing each other, and the smell of orange blossoms wafted out of the room because the colonel's wife Dolores used to bathe in orange blossoms. So that's the story. That's
right.
A very interesting romantic story of love
right.
and betrayal and death and deceit and all that. Well, this is how the story started. The story started with a park ranger that worked at the fort. And they used to, they still have a display in the powder room, basically. They even, for a while, they put beds in there and stuff. But it was used as a trash room. They threw cattle bones, leftover carcasses, pieces of chicken and stuff
right.
like that in there. And then they bricked it over when the British came, and it stayed there for a long time. When they did actually open up that room, what they found was all this massive waste bones, and they found an arm and a leg of two different humans. That arm and that leg came from two guys who, in 1702, while the British were in the bay lobbing... that's our dog yawning, if you heard that noise. While the British were in the bay lobbing cannonballs at the fort for 4 solid months... and realizing they couldn't take over the fort, the British came on land and started to take over the city, burning down the city and stuff. So these two Spanish soldiers up on the top of the fort at the time, when the foot soldiers from the British came marching in, they took a cannon and they overloaded the cannon to try to take out as many of the foot soldiers as they could with each shot. needless to say, the first time they shot that overloaded cannon, it exploded, blowing off the leg of one guy and blowing off the arm of another. So what did the Spanish do? They took that arm and leg and they threw it in the powder room with all the cattle bones, chicken bones, and all the other garbage. And then that's where they stayed. And that's the story. But this park ranger, basically, they had a display of people shackled up in this room. They sort of made it a legend that this could have been used as a dungeon sort of prison room and stuff, because the fort was used as a prison for quite a few different people, but not in that room and not in that way for those people. So after those mannequins were actually removed years later, there was a shadow on the wall where the mannequins were shackled, because there's a tiny little parapet window of light coming into it at this point now, and it basically discolored the wall. So this park ranger would tell people when they did their Dawson tours, because it was a volunteer tour, the fort at that time, he made up this story of how they had this happening with Dolores and the captain. And sometimes when you walk into the room, the shadows aren't even in the same place. They move around on the walls from day to day. So it was all just a complete urban legend. But every single ghost tour in St. Augustine is going to tell you about the captain's wife, the colonel's wife and the captain. Because sometime back in, I think, the 60s, this park ranger made up this story, and it has now become so ingrained that it is an accepted story. But historically, it never happened. To me, finding a room full of bones mixed with human bones, and why? Because a cannon exploded and blew these two guys' body parts off. That's interesting to me. It's historic. It's a massive battle that took place for months, and then they burnt the city down at the end.
I mean, I get it, but I would have been way more entertained if it had literally been like a room full of bodies.
Yeah, that's true.
But when you start telling me it was just a trash room, I get kind of bored.
Yeah.
Like give me a room full of body parts.
Well,
human body parts.
What I try to say more so now is that they found this room and there were human body parts in there.
Excellent.
And then people go, "Wow!" And I'm like, "Yeah, because they blew themselves up with a cannon." So to me, that's kind of crazy, but it's cool. I don't know.
I mean, it happens.
Yeah. There's a lot of stories, and it's not just in St. Augustine. And that just kind of proves the point. Without the research behind something, these stories can get out of control. The head of Osceola is a perfect example too.
Oh yeah.
Chief Osceola, the Seminole Nation. He was captured along with a lot of his tribesmen under a truce flag. They were meeting out in the open to discuss a peace accord, and they ended up taking him and his tribesmen prisoner in the Castillo de San Marcos. And 19 of Osceola's men managed to somehow escape the fort and survive. And then Osceola himself came down with malaria, was sent to Fort Moultrie, South Carolina, where he died with a private doctor. Okay, now the story goes on. His private doctor, Dr. Whedon, asked to have time alone with the chief so that he could make a death mask of him, so that everybody would always know what Chief Osceola looked like.
This dude is my favorite.
And then the story goes from there to say, while he was in the room with the chief alone, and this could be true, it could be complete urban legend, that the doctor actually beheaded the chief and smuggled his head for his own private keeping, so to speak. Sealed the coffin.
He used it as a Halloween decoration. That dude is amazing.
All kinds of crazy stories. He put his head in a pickle jar, brought it back down to Florida, used to scare his children at night when they wouldn't go to sleep.
I love this guy.
Used to put it on his office desk for when patients he didn't like come in. He's like, "Oh, I got this head. Perfect." And then they would leave terrified. So now that has evolved into late at night when you're on the grounds of the fort, you can see the disembodied head of Chief Osceola floating across the lawn. And I've even heard people say you can see his head up in the trees in the Huguenot Cemetery across the street. So there you go. An urban legend is born. Chief Osceola died of malaria at Fort Moultrie, South Carolina, and the doctor may or may not have beheaded him. And that's as far as I take it. And then I say after that, and then I explain the story.
Right.
Because people do claim to see disembodied heads. It's a fact. If there's an apparition, in a place, you may not see an entire body. In fact, it's quite unlikely you'll see an entire body apparition very often, if ever. Usually you'll see them from about the waist up, or you'll just see their head, or you'll just see a misty figure with a face in it or something. So, but anyway, that became our tangent of a podcast tonight.
It works. It works.
But I hope it, at least a little bit, it kind of summed up some questions and kind of like, well, don't always rely on a third or fourth hand story of a place, and don't freak out because somebody said there's a demon living in this house, and it's really, you hear knocking on the cabinets every once in a while.
Right.
And over the years it has become somebody was murdered there and they hid bodies in their cellar, and next thing you know there's faces in the walls and whatever.
Yeah.
So that's where research and all that, and how it can affect people on a psychological level in a lot of different ways. So step back, take a breath.
Be a skeptic.
Yeah,
it's fun to be a skeptic.
Even if you're a very believing person, which you
I
and
am.
I both are.
Yeah.
I still go into every situation like, okay, well, let me see why this is like this first, without just saying, oh, wow, yeah, I'm going to go right. I believe it right off.
And actually, I find it a lot of fun to disprove something. Like, if you hear a noise, like going and locating where the noise came from and figuring out, it's kind of, you get to be Sherlock Holmes.
Right, exactly. The research, the investigation, that's why we call it paranormal investigating, because it's not just finding paranormal evidence, it's finding out why there's paranormal evidence, and oftentimes why there's not, and it's perceived to be.
Right.
So it's a full spectrum sort of, it's a catch-all term. You're investigating the truth, the facts, the history, and the paranormal, why it became that way, or why it isn't that way and is perceived to be that way through tales or legends or just misunderstandings. Nobody knows everything. Like,
no.
You can't walk into a house and be a master electrician, be a plumber, be an architect, and realize, okay, well, this is maybe just old pipes banging around or something.
Right.
So, but
send us some questions.
Yes,
we enjoy answering them. We answer them on Facebook, but we will also answer them on our podcast in case somebody else has a similar question. Come give us a like on our Facebook page, Westgate Paranormal.
And we are also, we have a Patreon account if you'd like to help support us and have access to events and other evidence that we have that will make, only available to patrons who support us. And it's set up very reasonably. I won't go into a lot of detail, but that's patreon.com/Westgate Paranormal. Basically, if you Google Westgate Paranormal, it's going to lead you to us in some way or another because of our Facebook group and our Patreon account. So, or I shouldn't say Facebook group, it's a Facebook page.
Indeed.
Facebook.com/Westgate Paranormal. So, thank you very much. Once again, we really eagerly await to hear any questions, any comments. Please share this as much as you can. You can find us on pretty much any distribution channel there happens to be at the moment for podcasts. We'll be coming up on iHeartRadio here really soon also. That's the only real distribution channel we haven't come on yet, but that will be happening here soon. So thanks again, and until next time, if you're in Florida, you want to take a tour down in St. Augustine, let me know. I can hook you up. I give tours there almost every single night of the week. And there's some big news coming up with a friend of ours in Savannah who's also going to be starting another company down there. And we really look forward to it with him. And that's Ryan Dunn with the Savannah Ghost Research Society and his Afterlife
Tours.
Yep, Afterlife Tours. And I cannot speak highly enough of him and the research, a mass amount of research he puts in to every place he goes. So thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you.
And until next time, have fun, be careful, be safe, and be sure to share everything that you find. And if you have any questions, let us know. Thank you.